Since the 1970s, we've been fed a lie that carbohydrates are necessary for good health. Let's walk through the four major factors on how the carnivore diet can improve your sleep. A carnivore diet can be great, but not if you make these three mistakes. If you want to try a carnivore diet, here's the easiest way to do it. What if you could completely change around how you breathe and how you sleep at night and even get off of CPAP just by changing how you eat? But in order to do that correctly, you need to understand the top myths, the top mistakes, and how to easily integrate a carnivore diet into your daily routine. That's why in this episode, I'm going to go through all of that so that you understand how a carnivore diet works, if it's the right for you, and the exact steps to make it happen starting today. Before we plant some seeds of truth about this diet, I want to clear out some of the weeds because how many times when we mention a carnivore diet, we feel like our heart's going to explode, it's the worst thing for us. Oh my God, like, don't you know you need to eat plants all the time and this and that? But the thing is, the basis of nutritional sciences in the United States and basically everywhere as a big part of that is a huge attack on health. It just is. Because the fact of the matter is, the recommendations for food are not for your health. It's really based on big business here. And this goes all the way back to the Nixon administration. And stick with me on this one. You need to understand what the basis of the recommendations you will get from a doctor so that if you're speaking to one or you're speaking to someone else, you can really firmly stand on the truth of why you're doing what you're doing and have more faith and confidence in your actions. So before we get into the steps and the myths and all of that, we need to understand how we arrived to the standard American diet in the first place. And it all starts with Richard Nixon here, who I could not have gotten a worse photograph of him because you literally can't see his face. He's right over here. But the reason I got this, the man he is talking to is Earl Butz. You cannot get very far with that as your last name. I'm just going to be honest. Nonetheless, what happened during this time in American history? Inflation was really high, food costs were going up. As a result, they wanted to help bring food costs down, or so that's what they said. And the only way to do that is to increase the supply of something. And so that's why in the 70s, what happened was this introduction of mass farming of soy, corn, and wheat. And as a result, this is when you got the birth of all of these companies because those foods, they're relatively easy to grow, store, distribute, and turn into all these different foodstuffs. Seriously, during the 70s and 80s, the main primary question of food scientists and manufacturers was how can we take corn and turn it into something else? There was more corn than you could possibly ever imagine. And that's why we had the birth of all these different companies. And when we look through these, I want you to think in your mind, what are the main foods that come to your mind when we're talking about these companies? Whether it's General Mills with Cheerios and Golden Grams and Kix, whether it's PepsiCo with Quaker Oats, Tostitos, whether it is Nestle with all their different candy, Coca-Cola, all their different companies. What are all these foods? They're all incredibly carbohydrate rich. Like they all are. It's like not even close. It is a ridiculous amount of carbohydrates. And it was just lo and behold, at the same time, guess what the recommendations to eat a healthy American diet were? 6 to 11 servings of this stuff. Fancy how that works. Oh, let's grow a bunch of it. Let's build these companies. Oh, and let's make some recommendations on how we should eat. Now, they've kind of made the pyramid a little bit nicer looking, but it's still heavily driven by the consumption of these processed carbohydrates. So when your doctor or someone else freaks out, like, oh my God, you're not having carbohydrates and this and that, here's the thing. The recommendations for those in the first place was just an absolute pitiful excuse of economics and public policy. And honestly, something that is leading to the slow poisoning of health because we get the idea that big food is just like, well, it's just a calorie is a calorie. There's no quality involved here. Okay. And that's why when we look at people, if we compare the people who really advocate for, say, a carbohydrate driven diet, like Bill Gates over here, or someone who advocates heavily for a carnivore diet, you can start to see how the health of these individuals differs. So the bottom line is, do not buy the story that a life without carbohydrates is going to kill you. Do not buy the story that a life derived mainly from animal products is going to kill you. You need to appreciate that there's other powers, political, economic, that have driven us to a point of where we think this is healthy and we think this pyramid is going to literally make your heart explode. But that's not true. Now, this is also the reason because anything that is an economic force will then lead to the practice, which will then dictate the research. And this is why when we look at different things on the internet about a carnivore diet, this is literally what Google will say, associated with pseudoscientific health claims. Well, that may be true because guess what? Look how much research has ever been done on a carnivore diet. Very little, because there's not going to be funding from it because look at all these companies. You don't see any beef companies on here, do you? So when you try to find a carnivore diet and sleep apnea here, guess what? No research there either. And then you'll find other research that is linking up red meat intake specifically with increases in obstructive sleep apnea. So what are you left to think? Because when you go on the internet, whether it's from Reddit, whether it's from a podcast, you'll hear a lot of a carnivore diet can completely change around your sleep apnea. Yet, there's no scientific basis to back this up in the research literature. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying it doesn't work. What I'm saying is a absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. All that means, if people haven't researched it, how the heck would we know in the first place? Because when you look at these sorts of studies, red meat intake and sleep apnea, this is not even close to answering the question of what a carnivore diet does. They're just asking people how many hot dogs and processed meat you've eaten over the last few years. It's a very bad scientific setup. A lot of these nutrition studies, they're absolute jokes. Horribly performed scientific studies with poor conclusions to be drawn from them. Now, at the same time, this anecdotal evidence is never to be discounted. You should be able to dive deeper on this. Because I can tell you, whether it's people we've worked with personally, people I know, people switching to a carnivore template do have improvements. There's a lot of reasons for this. Because a carnivore diet is a means to a metabolic end. I'll say that again. A carnivore diet is a means to a metabolic end. And what that means is that there's many different things that happen when someone goes on a carnivore diet. And if you were to ask me how a carnivore diet leads to improved nighttime breathing and improved sleep quality, it is going to be these 4 factors. So when we're talking about the different myths and the different mistakes and how to implement a carnivore diet in just a few moments, you want to keep these main mechanisms in mind, because this is what allows fundamentally a carnivore diet to help with sleep apnea. This will lead to weight loss, which if you're overweight, obviously it will reduce the pressure on your neck and your airway anatomy so that it's more likely to be open and breathing is easier. You're going to have lower inflammation. And when you have more inflammation in your airway, it's going to narrow down a little bit. And then that will make it harder to breathe, and more likely you're going to have an obstruction. Additionally, improving insulin sensitivity. And insulin is the hormone in your body that allows glucose to go into your cells and metabolism to work properly. When you have better insulin sensitivity, this allows better blood sugar levels. And then both of those together will lead to better nighttime breathing and then also improved sleep quality. And the huge benefit of these 3 on the right is that you don't need to wait till you have actual weight loss to start having the benefits of a carnivore diet or any other diets that lead to these 4 intermediaries. So not only does a carnivore diet have the potential to reduce your snoring, to decrease your AHI if you're using a CPAP right now, or also just to allow you to wake up and you actually feel refreshed, you don't feel like you have a dry mouth or anything, it can do that. And then also the sleep you're getting in between the gasping or the micro wake ups, that is actually higher quality sleep. So signs where you know this is working is AHI is going down, sleep tracker numbers are looking better, and then also you're just feeling better. You're having more energy throughout the day because you're having better sleep. And before we start to get into exactly how you want to implement this, I want to go over some more myths or just blatant lies that we get about the carnivore diet, about nutritional deficiency, your heart exploding, and of course, how am I going to poop if I only eat meat, as most people would ask. So one thing that you'll hear from the nutritional zealots passed upon us is you're not going to get all the nutrients you need. Okay, great. Let's make one thing clear. This is a load of hogwash, bullocks, whatever the heck you want to say. It's just simply not true. Because when you look at the nutrition available through a carnivore diet, whether it is organ meats, liver, heart, kidneys, tongue, God bless you if you can do sweetbreads. I do not understand. If you eat sweetbreads and you enjoy it, let me know in the comments. I have never been able to figure that out. All of these bring a large amount of nutrients in, a ton of them, that honestly beat out almost all plant sources from these organ meats. Now, all of this may not seem ultra delicious, like, ooh, liver, right? Or especially those sweetbreads or tripe, which is intestine and brain. I don't know how you even legally procure brain to eat. I don't know. But nonetheless, you want to be able to have this in your diet a couple times a week, and that will help you more than any multivitamin ever would. And if you really want to just cheat around it, you can just get a desiccated form of these organ meats and take it as a supplement. You could just do that easy. Another great way is with eggs, especially egg yolks. You're going to get a broad array of nutrients from eggs, especially the egg yolk. And then, of course, good old canned fish, because a lot of times people will say, oh, but there's no calcium or anything like that. If you have any fish where you actually eat the bones, that's where you're going to acquire more than enough calcium than you would need for the week. And also bone broth, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's how you easily overcome any nutritional deficits in a carnivore diet. So including these in your diet, if you choose to do a carnivore diet, will help with that. And then also when we talk about the top mistakes, I'll also help you avoid any nutritional deficiencies as well. Other big myth, it's going to make your heart explode because you're eating meat, and meat is bad for your heart because it has saturated fat and it has lots of cholesterol. I hope you can tell by the tone of my voice, that's all sarcasm. I don't have the graph here, but this all stems from a gentleman known as Ansel Keys, who also ruined nutritional studies and research for many, many years. So thank you so much. He was a fella who was tasked with trying to figure out what diet could be healthiest for the United States. And what he did was he studied a few countries and their intakes of saturated fat and then decided, oh, we need to lower saturated fat. But follow-up research showed the exact opposite. So I'm showing you the follow-up research. I also showed you how Ansel Keys just kind of completely screwed everything up in terms of saturated fat. So here's a graph. And what Ansel Keys did was looked at the saturated fat intake of different countries and their rate of heart disease. And he found a few dots. I'll just draw them superimposed onto this graph. He only looked at 7. I think I have 7 dots here. Now, he did look at more than 7 countries. They were just dots in other places. He excluded those from his data set. And instead, he decided to just keep these few samples and just draw a straight line through it and say, the higher your saturated fat is, the more likely you're going to die of heart disease. Later, researchers came along, collected more data points, and they found the opposite. That saturated fat, as it goes up, actually is associated with fewer incidences of heart disease. Thanks, Ansel. And this is also how cholesterol got put on the chopping block. Very similar thing. Look at just a very small part of the data and then draw the wrong conclusion. Follow up research, the exact same thing happens. More cholesterol is associated with a lower incidence of heart disease and death. So overall, a carnivore diet will not make your heart explode. However, there is this issue with LDL that I cannot pass up. So LDL does go up in some people. Some people it goes really high, like 200, 300, 400. Now, in my experience, it's a very highly individual response, and the bigger thing that drives it, in my opinion, which is backed up by a lot of the research, is that the underlying inflammation in someone, that will drive the amount of LDL and also lipoprotein A. Those will go up. If you lower inflammation in other ways, whether it could be stress reduction, better sleep quality, etc., then LDL is less of a problem. So once again, high LDL is a symptom of a deeper underlying issue. So now we clear that up, your heart's going to be okay. And the very last one is, how the heck are you going to poop? Really briefly, this is a big meta-analysis, gold standard of all different studies. Gold standard meta-analysis. And what they found in this study, for the highlights, is that if you had constipation, defined as pooping less than 3 times per week, if you had that, yeah, fiber can help a little bit. But if you're normal, it doesn't really change anything. It does not lead to any obvious improvements. So you don't really have to worry so much about fiber either. So now that that's out of the way, you're going to have a better understanding of what you're doing, and you'll be able to better stand on implementing a carnivore diet. I also want to clear out the top 3 mistakes. So number 1, it's just right in our face, it is missing electrolyte. Now this happens for a variety of reasons, but the easiest way to overcome it is just to make sure you're getting ample amounts of salt and also bone broth. That is as simple. And the latest research is suggesting that subscribing to this channel may also improve your electrolyte status. The jury's still out. We'll have to wait quite a bit for that clinical trial to come out, but in the meantime, don't risk it and subscribe. So either way, the other big mistake with a carnivore diet is people not getting enough fat. And the reason this is a problem is because we mentioned earlier, one of the mechanisms is the improvement of carbohydrate metabolism by improving insulin sensitivity and stabilizing blood sugar levels. However, if you eat too much protein, what happens is that protein will eventually become metabolic carbohydrate, and that will lead to problems with insulin, so on and so forth. So a super high protein diet isn't the actual goal. It's to get a good balance. So a lot of times people will just go with very lean cuts of steak, chicken breast, etc. That's going to lead to protein levels that are too high. Then that will effectively reduce the improvement in carbohydrate metabolism that we're hoping for. So that's why you want to make sure that you're going for fattier cuts of meat, whether that is making sure there's a nice piece of fat on the side or actually in it like a chuck steak or fatty fish, etc. That will give you a more balanced macronutrient profile so that your metabolism is nice and balanced and you're able to improve insulin sensitivity and keep blood sugar levels stable. So make sure that you include fat in the actual food. And if you need to add it in, an animal source is absolutely fine, whether it's lard, tallow, or anything else. The other big mistake is being a red meatovore. I see this all the time. It's always on Instagram. Like the only thing that people eat on a carnivore diet that they want to share on the internet is eating a bunch of steaks. I've never understood it. In fact, I think it's a mistake. That was an entire setup for a pun. I'm sorry, if you just want to exit out of the video, you're free to do that. But nonetheless, when people only eat red meat, this is actually when they're going to be at the highest risk for these nutritional deficiencies. So you want to give a lot of good variety, especially about being able to have ample seafood, as shown here, salmon, oysters, canned sardines, different types of land roaming animals, lamb, pork. Those are going to give some nutrients that are not as rich in red meat. So make sure that you're not just beef, beef, beef. Go out to the other areas. So lamb, pork, the dark meat of chicken is going to be more nutritious than just the plain white chicken breast. And then, of course, making sure eggs is really one of the easiest things. And of course, your organ meat, whether that is you have the heart to cook it up or you just use that supplement. So those are mistakes. And now knowing how to implement this is important as well because this can be a transition and just eating meat all the time can be difficult, but it can also be super easy because a lot of times people make this mistake of just trying to make big change at once. Some people it sticks for a couple days and then it falls off. Some people do it and they're like, oh, I can't do it. So gradual change is going to be the easiest to stick to and the easiest to build onto. So if anyone were to do this, one of the easiest ways is to go meal by meal. What this looks like is instead of going full-blown carnivore, you just do breakfast. You do that for a few days, maybe even a week. You're getting down your routine with bacon and eggs or steak and salmon, whatever you're doing. Then you do lunch next. So you're doing breakfast and lunch. And then over time, then dinner. So you just swap out things where you're part-time carnivore in a way, and then that makes the transition pretty easy. And you're also able to iron out the kinks because a lot of times people are trying to figure out, oh, what recipes do I like? What do I like to cook? So on and so forth. And that brings me to my next point, which is making sure that you have an adequate meal prep plan. Because when you're eating fewer things that just come out of a box or a bag and there's these processed carbohydrates, you have to actually cook more. So when doing so, think about cooking bigger portions. And when you actually go and buy your different animal proteins, get the bigger pieces. One, they'll be cheaper. And two, it's always a lot nicer to cook up a 4-pound piece of meat and then have it over the course of a couple days than it is to have to cook steak like 12 times. So when you're meal prepping, get bigger pieces and then cook it for more meals. Now, I don't like weekly meal prep. I like bi-weekly, twice a week meal prep because after a certain amount of days, usually around 2 to 3, the nutritional value in things and also the risk of bacteria starts to go way up. So make sure that you pick a set of days, whether it's like Sunday and Thursday, to do your meal prep so that you're able to make that a little easier and the food doesn't go bad in the intro. So meal prep, super, super important. Cooking for multiple meals at the same time because you're getting bigger pieces. And then also, this is where canned fish and also hard-boiled eggs are a really, really good idea. So hard-boiled egg, you can just boil a bunch of them, like 24 at once. Oh, you have that for the next couple of days. Or canned fish, an easy add-on. And canned fish is great because if you're at work and you just don't want anyone to come around you, canned fish is a great social deterrent. I used to do it all the time. Nobody would ever speak to me, and look how I've turned out. Just fine. The next one is also preparing for social situations. And I'm not sure who wrote this here, but you could replace all your human friends with dogs. Just a thought, because they're so much better. And you can also plan ahead. So when you're picking out a restaurant, just looking at the menu, making sure it has something. Most of it will. Whether it's just a steak, whether it's just a chicken breast, whatever it is, that's going to be fine. But also, don't be so perfectionist. If you go to a place and you have chicken wings and they might be fried in peanut oil, okay, maybe you do that like once or twice a month. That's not going to be the make it or break it for your diet. It's just not. If it becomes a habit, it would be because that's an inflammatory seed oil. But just live a little. Because when you have so much strict rules around a diet, it becomes hard to stick to. So being like 95, 98% carnivore, if that allows you to not dip into being like 10% or like way off the bandwagon, then go ahead and do that. And then the very last thing is when people like are like, what, are you eating just meat? Yeah, just tell them. Tell them what you've learned here. Now, you don't need to be overzealous. You don't need to do that. Because a lot of times, people, their diet becomes like a religion and part of their identity. You just choose to eat a certain way. No one would ask you, why do you only eat vanilla ice cream? Huh? You think chocolate's bad? No one would ever do that. But if you're eating carnivore, it's the same thing. It's just a choice. I'm choosing to do this as opposed to that. Not a big deal. There are far weirder things going on in 2024 than you not eating a baked potato. So now that I'm off my soapbox, I also want to remind you that your N=1 is the most important. I really don't know if a carnivore diet is going to work for you individually, that one person watching this, maybe you're doing a family viewing this, I don't know. But nonetheless, some people love a carnivore diet, some people need some modifications. Your individual needs are always going to dictate that. But nonetheless, that should not stop you from doing something and trying something. Because you learned, yes, from this interaction, you saw some things on a screen, you heard some things that I said, but the biggest knowledge comes from implementing something and learning. That's why when we're working with our clients, we start with a plan, they do it, and then we're learning how their body's responding, and we're able to shortcut a lot of the trial and error and tell them, hey, this means this, let's make this adjustment. That's what the whole N=1 of where you are your own individual case. What happens in a study with 20,000 people may not apply to you because you're a unique individual with unique needs. And that's what leads me to the idea that you can have the same benefits as carnivore. Because we talked about those intermediaries, right? Reducing inflammation, improving glucose metabolism. But there's other ways to do that. It's not exclusive to a carnivore diet. And that's why in the next episode, I want to talk about the Mediterranean diet for sleep apnea. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So if that video is available, go ahead and click that. I'll put that right over my face. If it's not, make sure you go ahead and subscribe until that episode's come out. And if you want us to help you address your unique needs and overcome sleep apnea as quickly as possible, you can go to ochnow.com/talk, or there'll be a button at the top of the screen that says like book your free call. Either way, I'm Dr. Dylan Peckus. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode or talk to you soon.